All right, today we are diving into a really fascinating, kind of mind-bending idea. For any two things to be truly different, they first have to be, on some deep fundamental level, the same. I know, it sounds like a paradox, right? But it gets to the very heart of reality itself. So let's unpack it. It all kicks off with a question that seems pretty simple on the surface, but is actually way, way deeper than you think. How can two totally different things, you and me, an apple and an orange, anything, both exist in the very same reality? What is it that connects them, that even allows us to notice they're different in the first place? That's the core tension we're going to dig into. Okay, so think about night and day, total opposites, right? But to even compare them, to talk about them as different, we have to put them in a shared context. In this case, that context is time. They're not separate things. They're just two phases of one single continuous 24-hour cycle. And that simple idea, well, that's the key to this whole thing. Difference needs a shared background just to exist. So here's our game plan. We'll start with this paradox of difference, then I'll introduce you to a key concept called Syndiffeonesis. After that, we'll break down the anatomy of what a relation even is. From there, we'll see how this whole logic leads to the idea of one ultimate reality, and finally, why this all wraps up into this beautiful, self-resolving paradox. First up, the paradox of difference. You know, this really gets at a weird tension between two ideas we just kind of accept every day, that things can be totally separate and unique, but also, at the same time, connected and related to each other. How does that work? And this brings us to the central idea, the absolute mantra for this whole explainer. Say it with me. To be different, things must first be the same in some way. For any two things to have a meaningful difference, they've got to share some common ground, some kind of shared reality where that difference can even be noticed or measured. Okay, so to really pin this idea down, to formalize this concept of sameness holding difference, the source material gives us this awesome new word. And that word is Syndiffeonesis. Yeah, I know, it sounds super complex, but it's actually pretty elegant. It just mashes together syn, which means together or same, with diffeo, which means different. So it's literally the principle of difference in sameness. It's the idea that any real meaningful difference you can point to always implies a deeper shared reality underneath. You know, this quote from the source material just nails it. Any assertion to the effect that two things are different implies that they are reductively the same. The very act of pointing at two things and saying these are different is an admission that they both exist in some shared context that allows you to compare them. And on that level, they can be reduced to the same underlying thing. So, okay, how does this actually work? Let's break it down. Our next section looks at the anatomy of a relation, and this will give us a really clear visual model for understanding how sameness and difference actually hook up. But first, one quick term we need, relance. This is just a simple name for the distinct things that are being related to each other. So if we're comparing a cat and a dog, the cat is one reland and the dog is the other. Simple as that. All right, let's build this concept step by step. First, we start with two distinct things. Let's call them round X and round Y. Second, we know there's some kind of difference relation between them. But third, and this is the absolute key, for that difference to even be real or meaningful, both X and Y have to be contained inside a common medium. And now we can label the parts. The difference itself, the X and Y, that's the differonic phase. And that shared background, that's the synchronic phase. In short, sameness contains difference. This whole phase idea is a perfect analogy, right? Think of it like a stage play. The synetic phase is the stage itself, the shared background. And the diphoranic phase, that's all the action, all the differences happening on that stage. You just can't have the play without the stage. Okay, so now that we've got this basic model, let's have some fun with it. Let's see what happens when we take its logic all the way to the end, to its ultimate conclusion. And this is the critical next question you have to ask. We've said that any two different things have to exist in a common medium. But what if that medium isn't perfectly smooth? What if the medium itself has its own internal differences? Well, according to the rule we just set up, if the medial has its own differences, then it also must be contained within an even bigger, higher-level medium. It creates this nesting doll effect, right? A diagram inside a diagram. It's a logical process called a regress. But here's the thing, that can't just go on forever. To avoid this infinite chain with no foundation, the stacking has to stop somewhere. It must end in one final, ultimate medium that is perfectly uniform and contains absolutely everything else. And that right there, That leads us to this really profound conclusion. If you follow the logic of Syndiffeonesis all the way up, you're forced into one necessary outcome. All of reality, with all of its insane variety and complexity, must just be an expression of a single, unified underlying medium. At the most fundamental level, everything is one. So why does any of this matter? What's the big payoff of looking at the universe this way? Well, our final section gets into the really unique power and, honestly, the elegance of this framework. What this theory does is frame reality not as some static collection of facts, but as a dynamic, constantly moving, self-resolving paradox. The paradox of how sameness and difference can possibly exist at the same time. Okay, so here's how it all snaps together. The paradox is that sameness and difference seem like they contradict each other, but we know they're both real. The resolution is that they don't actually exist on the same level. Difference exists within sameness, on a different layer. And here's the really cool part. The source argues that a reality built on this kind of structure, a self-resolving paradox, is inherently stable. It might even be immune to other kinds of logical contradictions. So the really crucial takeaway here is this. By defining reality as this constant dance between sameness and difference, the whole system becomes logically coherent. That paradox isn't a flaw in the system. It's the fundamental engine that makes the whole thing work. And this leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending question to chew on. If this theory holds up, and if all the differences we see and feel every day are just ripples on the surface of one single unified reality, then what does it truly mean for anything to be different at all? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.